Hey everybody. In the early part of September of 2013, starting on Monday, September 9th, Colorado Front Range received a lot of what we refer to as upslope flow. That's winds coming out of the east, up the east flank of the Rocky Mountains. That tends to wrench the moisture out of the air, and along with the upslope flow came a lot of advected moisture. And so we got rain through the whole week, but here in Golden, the Colorado School of Mines home, we really got lucky. There was not that much rain, and so we end up with a lot of greenery, but no flooding. To our south in Colorado Springs, it was worse, and much worse to the north, where I'm panning here. Flooding begins up around Highway 72, Coal Creek Canyon, all the way up through Boulder, all the way up past Fort Collins. Now, my wife and I, on November 29th and 30th, decided that we should take a trip up there once everything had calmed down and stop in Lyons, Colorado to stay and take a look at some of the damage that had occurred there. Also pump some money back into the economy. Doing some holiday shopping there was another one of our objectives. When we first got in on Friday the 29th, we went up this old St. Vrain Valley here, and you can see from the Google image that this valley is a kind of flat, broad valley, that the river channel is in a single channel that winds across the valley. The valley floor seems to be mostly covered by grass and shrubs in this case, and we're going to launch from this little Kings Ranch area up in the upper left corner. That road up there is where we're parking, and launch the copter from. And now we can see that after the flood, the stream is back in a channel, but actually on this side, the channel was off on the far west side of the valley over there, and it's shifted completely, so we see stream channels completely changing their course. The ground cover, there's a little bit of shrubs left, but you see a lot of deposition in this area that it's been covered over by sand and gravel, cobbles, and boulders. You simply have to imagine the water during this flood reaching all the way from wall to wall in this valley, because that is what it did. An image that was taken shortly after the flood, when there was a break in the clouds, shows just what this wall-to-wall valley flooding looked like. Now, off to the right-hand side, we're going to see that the stream valley is no longer in a single channel, but it's breaking apart in what we call anastomosing flow, or a braided stream. And that's what happens when you have more sediment deposited into a valley than the stream can move. It breaks apart in these shallow channels. Those can flood rather frequently. Now, another problem would be if you fly a DJI quadcopter and your batteries of your transmitter begin to die and give your copter some strange signals. I'm telling it to go forward now, and instead it's flying sideways and backwards over a horse pasture, and this is the result. That's what it sounded like at the crash point. It sounded more like cursing over at my side. And after a long search, I did finally find it. So that was pretty much our footage day for that day. On the next day, we went up Highway 36 and went up to Estes. And we were taking a look at some of the damage along the valley there. Now, the main theme in this area is erosion. And it was strange to see how haphazard it could be, that certain areas were completely destroyed and others were still intact. The grass was still laid down flat in areas from where the direction of water flow, and the rock walls were completely scoured clean. No debris, no rocks, no vegetation, and then there were the houses. Again, haphazard. Some stood and some did not, but all of them down in the valley seemed to sustain some damage. Shelley's cottages here seem to take almost the worst brunt of it. The reason, I don't know. Maybe it's because this area had more soft sediment that was more easily eroded, or maybe there was a natural artificial dam upstream that breached and caused a big pulse to come through the area. But it wasn't just houses that were destroyed. Other infrastructure, like roads. They're seeing actively built roads right now, trying to reattach the network of systems in that area. But not just roads, but also any pipelines, sewage systems, gas lines. Vegetation along the banks. Now, these newly exposed banks are great for cottonwood seedlings. They're probably going to grow up very quickly along the new banks. However, in the meantime, the loss of vegetation along the banks is a concern because the leaves and needles of trees tend to grab moisture from the air and keep it from falling directly to the ground so quickly, allowing it to evaporate back to the atmosphere or soak into the ground slowly and not go into runoff, which is what causes this flooding. So we do worry that this area might get hit by flash floods again. This is an area, you see the bridge washed out, that any residents who live there would have had to have been helicoptered out because the road had been destroyed both upstream and downstream. And there was no other way out, and especially with the bridge washed out, it made it a moot point. Now, going farther upstream, you'd see less and less erosion because there's less and less catchment of the water, but it was amazing that even on side channels to the main channel, we saw this erosive scouring. It must have been a fantastic sight. And the worst of the erosion seems to be on the outside of the bend of streams. Now, this is what we'd expect as geologists. The outside of a bend is what we call the cut bank of a stream. The inside is the point bar. If you imagine a stream like a marching band, the people on the outside of the marching band going around the corner have to go faster than the people on the inside of the bend. Same with the water. It has to go faster around the outside of this bend on the cut bank that we're driving than the inside. And so where we're driving had a lot of erosion. That's why the road was taken out in this area and had to be rebuilt. And it's hard to say that these houses are lucky at all, but they had less erosion on the point bar side, but still they were getting erosion and deposition, and well, you can see the devastation. The amount of debris down in the creek was amazing as well. You could see it wrapped around the trees. There were television sets and refrigerators out on the side of the road and people's prized possessions. It really was quite a sight to see and rather disturbing. When we finally came back down out of the canyon on Highway 36, we got back into Lyons, and you start to see the system change. It's still eroding. It's still taking out bridges. It's still taking out roads. But we're starting to see more deposition as well, like these big gravel bars that you see down there. Now, deposition is going to be a problem in and of itself. But the erosion, there were more houses in the valley than what you're going to see in our footage because a lot of them were washed away. There are roads that were bridges that are now just roads going to nowhere up against the stream. And we see fragments, pieces of houses like these roofs over here. It's hard to say how far these rooftops were washed downstream. I wouldn't expect too far because as soon as they run into something like trees, they'll stop moving and begin to pile up material behind them. And it shows you part of what we're seeing down in Lyons. We have the erosion. Absolutely, it's tearing these buildings apart and it's ripping up at the walls of the stream. But we're also seeing deposition. As soon as these roofs come to a standstill, you can see that there are trees deposited on top of them. There's sand and gravel and probably boulders deposited on top of them as well. So you'll have to imagine water rushing down this stream, not in this channel that you see here, but all the way from the right wall to the left side, all the way across the left. That is basically where the flood occurred. As we pull up here, we can see that going up Highway 36 towards Estes, you have to take a very hard left turn, which means coming down out of that canyon, you have to take a very hard right turn. And so there is a massive cut bank point bar system occurring right where this bend occurs, and you can expect that the outside of the bend had bad erosion, and that's where the road is. Pretty much all the road that you're seeing here is new road. It's been rebuilt. Way off in the distance you can see a little bit, not anymore, of the old road system down there. So the whole cut bank outside left side was the erosion side here, and you can see how it's cut away and that the trees, the roots have protected a lot of it, but right where I'm standing the trees fell and it got notched back. Its protection of roots was lost at the end of the flood here. On the road level, when we come back down to ground, we can see the old road on that big right-hand turn coming out of the canyon, and it just disappears. The road used to go where the stream is now. So both the old St. Vrain and this North St. Vrain valleys, the channel has completely changed positions, and that's what rivers tend to do, especially in these flood events. They will jump from one channel to a new channel. In the interim, though, the whole area is covered with water. We see porta potties lining the streets because the water and sewage has been destroyed and has not been up and running yet. We use this sign as a marker for how high the water got, and Becky is 5'11", so you can imagine she would have been underwater standing at this location, and everything else would too. So at the end of our trip, we went back over to the old St. Vrain South Side Fork, and our friends, who were nice enough not to shoot us when we were looking for a helicopter on their property, told us that this bridge here basically became a dam. It piled up a lot of debris behind it, probably stuff like what you're seeing here, logs and branches and human artifacts, pieces of buildings, piled up behind this bridge, forming a temporary lake behind it, and then finally the dam breaches, the bridge breaks, and we were told that the bridge broke on the side that we're standing on here, basically severing that side off. It made a nice back eddy over here, and Becky was attentive enough to tell me that I was being an idiot standing there and filming, because it really wasn't the safest place to be standing. Once you take a look from this perspective, you'll see why she's very good at keeping me safe. So it breaches on this side, erodes through the entire valley, and what you see in these deposits, yes, rocks, boulders, but also human artifacts, logs, and it's not just sand. When you see this from the air, you see these things that look like sandbars. They're not sandbars, they're gravel bars, or debris bars, if you want to call them that. Here Becky shows us how high the debris field is on this tree. Again, she'd be underwater. All the way across this valley would be underwater. So you can imagine that where these two river systems come together, it must have been horrible, the amount of water flowing through. And we did take drives through that neighborhood, and rather heartbreaking, really. Every house had an orange sticker on the door which basically condemned it, or at least temporarily said you cannot live here. And some of these houses, yeah, I think they will be able to recover. It's going to take a lot of work. You can see how much sediment has been pulled out of these houses. The deposition issue here was horrible. Some of the houses, I just don't see how they're going to ever recover. So the people of Lyons are definitely hurting. It was an incredible travesty. So I'd say maybe take a cue from Becky and I if you have some holiday shopping to do. Maybe take a trip up in the flood-hit areas and see if you can pump some money back into their economy. They really, really need it. So we'll end here with one last aerial shot of the North Vrain Fork, and I wanted to point out these linear patterns in the valley floor down here. They look like stretch marks. Those are ripples. And they're not sand or silt ripples. Those are ripples of cobbles and boulders. And you can see where the new road meets the old road, the section that was washed out. It's amazing that this one little section survived, whereas you can see how much of that road actually was completely destroyed and had to be rebuilt. One of the other reasons that Becky and I came back to Lyons was because we wanted to stay at the Stone Mountain Cottages, which is a place where we stayed when we were first dating. So we were incredibly happy to see that even though this was on the cut bank side and should have been gone, it was one of the lucky few that survived. So, pay them a visit as well if you're in the area. And thanks for your time, and make sure that you take care. Goodbye.